took her life. I want his life. He don't deserve to be alive.
On April 1st, 1988, 8-year-old April Tinsley went out for a bike ride in her neighborhood. She was a sweet, innocent girl living a simple life with her family in Fort Wayne, Indiana. She didn't know it at the time, but that afternoon, she would disappear without a trace. For over 20 years, her disappearance would haunt a community, leaving everyone wondering what happened to the young girl who vanished from a quiet street on that fateful day. The search for April stretched on for days, weeks, months. The case grew colder. The mystery surrounding her death seemed unsolvable. But what no one could have anticipated was that the truth, the identity of her killer, was hidden in something most people could never have imagined: DNA. What started as a child's disappearance would soon become a case that would capture the attention of the entire nation. It would lead to a breakthrough in forensic science that would change the way cold cases were solved and, in this case, it would bring justice to a family that had waited far too long for answers. Stay with us as we uncover the heartbreaking details behind the murder of April Tinsley and the breakthrough that would finally reveal the killer's identity after 20 years of silence. Fort Wayne, Indiana, a small, close-knit community where life seemed simple. Kids played outside without fear, parents exchanged pleasantries on neighborhood walks, and families lived in quiet comfort, far from the shadows of major city crime. This was a town where the most serious concerns were the everyday worries of life. April Tinsley was like any other 8-year-old girl. She loved riding her bike, playing with friends, and spending time with her family. She was known for her infectious smile, her energy, and her love of adventure. April's family meant everything to her. She was the beloved daughter of Janet Tinsley, a family who was simply enjoying life in their small town, never suspecting that their world would soon be shattered by a nightmare. April lived in a quiet neighborhood on the west side of Fort Wayne, a part of town that felt like a sanctuary, a place where children were free to roam and parents could rest easy. The neighborhood schools were within walking distance, the streets were safe, and the community was tight-knit. There was no reason to believe that anything could happen to a young girl in such a place. But on April 1st, 1988, everything changed. That was the day when April's life, and the life of her family, would be torn apart forever. It was a typical spring afternoon, and April had just finished her school day. She was looking forward to her usual bike ride, one that would turn into the most terrifying moment of her family's life. April was no different from any other child that day. She told her mother she was going out to visit her friend, as she had done many times before. It was a simple thing, a normal activity. No one could have known that it would be the last time anyone saw her alive. Her mother, Janet, watched April leave the house, trusting her daughter to be safe. After all, this wasn't a neighborhood where parents worried about their children's safety. The bike ride was just another part of daily life. April's destination was her friend's house, only a few blocks away. The trip would have taken her just a few minutes, and it was a route she had ridden countless times before. But on that afternoon, something went terribly wrong. As April pedaled along the street, everything seemed normal, but just a few moments later, she would be gone. By the time April's family realized she hadn't returned home, panic set in. It was unlike her to be gone for so long without letting anyone know. The bike ride that had started as a simple, innocent outing had become something far more sinister. As the hours passed, the Tinsley family became frantic. No one had seen April. She was nowhere to be found. With each minute that passed, the sinking feeling in her mother's stomach grew. Something was terribly wrong. The search for April began immediately. Friends, family, and neighbors scoured the streets, calling her name and asking anyone who might have seen her. Police were notified, and an official search effort was launched. But despite their best efforts, there was no sign of April. No clues, no leads, no one who had seen anything unusual. The next few days were a blur of frantic searches, interviews, and growing despair. The peaceful town of Fort Wayne was gripped by fear, and still, no one had any answers. April had simply vanished. The investigation into April's disappearance began almost immediately. The community, now shaken by the reality of a child being taken so suddenly, rallied to help. Friends, neighbors, and law enforcement officers went door to door, asking questions. But despite their best efforts, there were no immediate leads. As hours turned into days, a sense of urgency gripped the town. April's family felt helpless as the search intensified. They feared the worst, but they held on to the hope that April would somehow be found alive. The Tinsleys weren't alone. The whole community was searching, hoping for any sign, any trace of the young girl who had vanished so suddenly. Then, on April 4th, 1988, 3 days after April was last seen, the unimaginable happened. A jogger, running along the road 20 miles outside of Fort Wayne, made a horrifying discovery. He found the remains of a little girl lying near the ditch, 40 feet off the side of the road. It was April. But it wasn't just the discovery of her body that was shocking, it was the manner in which she had been found. April's body was fully clothed, except for one missing shoe. The sight of the missing shoe would become one of the most haunting details in the investigation. Why was it gone? Had she struggled with her abductor? Why was she left with only one shoe? The missing shoe sparked an unsettling theory. The killer had taken her shoe off while transporting her, possibly in a car. But the evidence was far from clear. The authorities quickly began to suspect that April's abductor might have driven away from the scene, dumping her body far from where she was last seen. An autopsy would later confirm the worst. April had been strangled to death. She had also been sexually assaulted, adding another layer of horror to this tragedy. DNA was collected from the crime scene. But in 1988, forensic technology wasn't advanced enough to provide immediate answers. Despite the heartbreaking findings, there was little evidence to go on. Investigators believed that the killer may have been local, someone familiar with the area. April's body was dumped in a secluded spot, a place where an outsider would be less likely to know, a private, quiet area off a road that most wouldn't visit unless they lived nearby. Police suspected that the killer had knowledge of the area, someone who knew where to take April to hide the body. As investigators scoured the region for potential suspects, they received multiple tips from witnesses who claimed to have seen something unusual on the day of April's abduction. One witness came forward, recalling a blue truck spotted near the area where April was last seen. This witness described a man who looked similar to the composite sketch that had been drawn from earlier tips. Could this be the killer? The police didn't have enough to go on, but the idea that the man in the blue truck might have been involved kept investigators on edge. But despite this lead, there were no immediate arrests. The investigation grew more complex. Witnesses continued to come forward, but no one could definitively identify the man in the truck. And with no solid evidence, the case started to go cold. The years dragged on with no progress. DNA testing wasn't as advanced in the 1980s as it would later become. There was no way to track down the suspect using the technology available. As time went on, the pain of not knowing weighed heavily on April's family. But the Tinsley family never gave up. They fought to keep their daughter's case alive, even as the community moved on. For the Tinsley family, the pain of losing their daughter was never far from their hearts. They continued to hold on to hope, believing that one day, someone would answer for the brutal murder of their little girl. But no answers came. And as time passed, the case began to slip from public view. It seemed like April's killer might never be found. Then, something disturbing happened 2 years later that reignited the fear and suspicion that had been building since April's murder. But before we move forward, I want to know, where are you watching from? It's always amazing to see how these stories connect with people from all around the world. Leave a comment below and let me know where you're tuning in from. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the important stories we'll be uncovering here on Crime Matters Uncovered. Now, let's get back to the case. This next part is where things start to get really intense. In 1990, unsettling notes began to surface in Fort Wayne. These letters were addressed to young girls in the community, each one eerily similar in age to April at the time of her death. One of the notes read, "Hi, honey. I've been watching you. I am the same person who kidnapped, raped, and killed April. You are my next victim if you don't report this to the police. If you do, I'll blow up your house." These notes were more than just disturbing, they were a direct link to April's killer, or at least someone who was taunting the community. Some of the notes even included graphic photographs, and others contained used condoms. These were deeply disturbing not only because of the threats, but also because they confirmed that the killer was still active, still watching, and still frightening children in the very same neighborhood. The police feared that the killer was escalating. With every passing note, the fear spread through the town. Parents locked their doors and kept their children inside, while the authorities began to frantically search for any trace of the person responsible for these terrifying threats. The handwriting in these notes was eerily similar to that of a letter written years before, one that was left at the scene of April's murder. As the years went by, more disturbing reports surfaced. Some of the girls who received the notes claimed they had seen a blue truck near their homes, similar to one that had been spotted in the area near April's abduction. Witnesses described a man who appeared to be in his 30s, a man who had a history of sexual offenses. Could this be the same person who had taken April's life? Then, a breakthrough. A young man came forward claiming that his father, a registered sex offender, had been acting suspiciously around the time of April's murder. The man had access to a blue truck, and his behavior matched the disturbing language in the notes. Could this be the man who had been terrorizing the community? The new suspect was brought in for questioning, and everything seemed to line up. His alibi for the day of April's disappearance appeared suspicious. He could remember what he had been doing on April 1st, 1988, the day April vanished. The timing seemed odd. Why would he remember what he was doing on that specific day? The suspect insisted that he had been working on April 1st, but investigators soon learned that his alibi didn't hold up. He hadn't been working that day at all. As more inconsistencies surfaced, the police grew confident that they were on the right track. But despite the circumstantial evidence, there was a major setback. When the police sent DNA from the suspect to the lab for comparison, the results came back with no match. The DNA from the crime scene did not match the suspects, leaving investigators in a frustrating limbo. For the next 14 years, the case remained cold. The investigation continued, but no new leads emerged. April's killer was still out there, lurking in the shadows. The town of Fort Wayne remained on edge, fearing that the man responsible for the murder and the threatening notes was still watching. For decades, the case of April Tinsley seemed like it would never be solved. The heartbreaking lack of evidence, combined with the disturbing threats made by the killer, kept the community living in fear. But in 2015, a new approach was taken, one that would change everything. The Fort Wayne police sent DNA samples from April's case to Parabon Nanolabs, a lab that uses advanced genetic analysis to create a phenotypic profile of a person. This method, called phenotyping, analyzes the DNA and predicts physical traits of the suspect, traits like hair color, eye color, and even ancestry. The lab's analysis revealed that the suspect was a white male, likely of British or German descent, with brown hair and hazel eyes. This description, startlingly accurate, matched the original composite sketch of the man who had been seen driving the blue truck in 1988, the same vehicle that had been linked to April's disappearance. With this new information in hand, the investigation took a sharp turn. But this wasn't the end of the story. The breakthrough was just beginning. The next step involved using genealogy websites to search for any relatives of the suspect. Thanks to the rise of public genealogy databases, where individuals freely upload their DNA for ancestry purposes, investigators were able to trace family connections. This led them to a match that would ultimately lead to a name, John D. Miller. John D. Miller, a resident of Gravel, Indiana, had been living quietly in the same community for years. His neighbors described him as a reclusive man, someone who was often angry and isolated. But despite his troubling personality, no one had ever suspected him of being capable of such a heinous crime. The breakthrough wasn't just about DNA, it was about putting the pieces together. Investigators learned that John's brother had been involved in an unusual method of collecting DNA. He had been gathering DNA from trash in an attempt to connect his family to the case, and when the DNA samples were tested, they confirmed it, the DNA from John D. Miller matched the DNA collected from April's murder. It was July 15, 2018, when the police finally arrived at John D. Miller's home, just hours before a special episode of Paula Zahn on the case aired, covering April's tragic story. When the officers knocked on his door, they asked him if he knew why they were there. John D. Miller's response was disturbing. "April Tinsley," he said.
Any idea what we need to talk to you about?
I think probably the Tinsley case. That's the only one I can think of.
The chase was over, John D. Miller confessed to abducting, raping, and murdering April Tinsley more than 30 years before.
You've already admitted to this by the letters and the condoms that you left for us. What'd she say when you grabbed her?
She said, don't hurt me, I'll do whatever you say.
After so many years of grief and unanswered questions, April's family finally had the justice they deserved. On December 7th, 2018, John D. Miller pleaded guilty to the murder and child molestation charges. He was sentenced to 50 years in prison, where he will spend the remainder of his life. However, his sentence for child molestation means he won't be eligible for parole until 2058, when he will be 99 years old. While April's killer may be locked away, the damage he caused will never be fully undone. But for the Fort Wayne community and for the Tinsley family, there is a sense of relief that the man who took April's life is no longer out there.
I was the last person that got up there and spoke. I read my statement. I said, I want one question answered from you. I want to know why. Why her? And the first words came out of his mouth was, he was bored.
This case took 30 years to solve. It took scientific advancements, the persistence of dedicated investigators, and the courage of a community that refused to forget. And it was DNA technology that ultimately brought the truth to light, ending the hunt for April's killer. The city of Fort Wayne never forgot April Tinsley, and neither should we. Her legacy is more than just a solved case. It's a symbol of the unyielding fight for justice, and the unbreakable bond between a family and their missing child. Before we go, I want to hear from you, our viewers. What are your thoughts on the role of DNA technology in solving cold cases? Do you think we'll see more cases like April's solved in the future? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your opinions. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to Crime Matters Uncovered. We cover more stories like this one, bringing you deep dives into cases that shape the nation and the hearts of those who seek justice. Thank you for watching, and remember, every voice matters, and justice is worth the wait.